Dude, man, I like your off-roader.
Dude, thanks, man. It's like not even lifted yet, but like.
No, bro, I'm talking about this sweet wheel gap on the Miata.
No, man, not. Are you tired of your Miata being called a monster truck? Your friends come up to your wheel gap and say, haha, that's really big.
That's what she said.
I am really tired of that, and I want to lower my car for a few different reasons, but we'll get into that in a moment. But really quick, let's talk about what I have in front of me, what your options are when lowering your car, and why I'm lowering mine. So these are lowering springs. If you want to lower your car, you really only have two options. You can do a coilover, which is both the springs and the coils being swapped out for an aftermarket unit. This provides a little bit more adjustability and ride height adjustment as well. That is really nice to have, but it comes at a premium. Most coilovers are around $1,000, give or take a few $100 depending on quality. These, however, are a fraction of that cost. These are about $230, but lowering springs can range anywhere from like $200 to $300. So this is a much cheaper option. Why is it cheaper, you might ask? You don't get any ride height adjustability. The drop the lowering springs are advertised with is the drop that you're going to get. It is a little bit more time intensive, and you do have to do a little bit more work because you do have to get these onto your stock struts. So I'll show you how to do all that. It's not really that difficult, but it can be a little bit sketchy. You are going to be using some spring compressors. But like I said, cost is the real motivator for a lot of folks to put in lowering springs. Also simplicity. One less thing to adjust is one less thing to mess up. That's how I've looked at it before. I have done lowering springs on previous cars that I've had, and I've really liked that I just set it and forget it. Why you might want to lower your car, you have a few main driving factors behind that. There's aesthetics and handling. Obviously, low cars look cool. That's one of the main reasons why I'm lowering mine. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't for aesthetic purposes, but it's also in combination with the handling gains that you get as well. When you lower your car, you're lowering the center of gravity, which can make it corner better, feel more planted. Also, when you swap out your suspension, it can be a little bit stiffer, which isn't great for daily driving, but when you're looking to eliminate body roll and cornering and feel the road a little bit more, a stiffer suspension can be nice. So before we get started with the install, I have my buddy Jeff here to help out with that. Really quick, these are the Eibach lowering springs made with IL Motorsports, and huge thank you to Moss for supplying these for this video. These are a 40 mil drop up front and a 50 mil drop in the rear. So they're also designed to be used with the non-Bilstein suspension. So just the regular suspension on your sport or your touring or your grand touring without the suspension package. So the black struts instead of the yellow struts. I do have aftermarket Coney shocks on my car already. So I will be pairing these with those. I'm hopeful that that will still end up with a good ride. They're supposed to. They are very specific in their instructions that these springs were designed by Eibach to work well with the OEM non-Bilstein struts. Like many jobs, this one starts by getting the car up in the air. I recommend jacking it up as high as you can, and I'll explain that a little bit later. And also make sure you break your lug nuts loose if you do not have an impact wrench. Quick note here too, I typically just jack up the car from the pinch welds. I do have a pinch weld saver on my jack and on my jack stand as well, just to keep from damaging those. We'll start under the hood for the front struts. These are 3 14 mil bolts on the top. They were on there pretty good, so we had to get the bigger impact to get that last one off. And then moving underneath, definitely recommend taking off the little brackets that hold on the brake lines. These are 2 12 mil bolts. This will allow the upper control arm to move a little bit more freely. And you do need to remove the bracket closest to the engine bay to have access to get these upper control arm bolts out. These are 17 mil bolts, and the nut on the back side is captive. At least mine were, so I didn't have to worry about putting a wrench on the back. Yeah, here you can see we did have to remove it just to get the bolt to wiggle out, and then another 17 mil bolt with a free nut on the back, so you do need to put a wrench on there. Lastly, I highly recommend removing your front sway bar end link. To do this, you need a 14mm wrench and a 5mm hex bit. We didn't do this for the removal, but we were forced to do it when putting them back in. Speaking of removal, it was pretty straightforward to do. The upper control arm is definitely necessary to get loose to pull it out. Just be careful of damaging your fender. One quick pro tip here, just to avoid any undue stress on your ABS sensors and your brake lines, put one of your upper control arm bolts back into place just to hold the control arm while you are getting your lowering springs mounted. The removal of the rear struts starts in the trunk. You do have to remove all of these plastic panels to get to the bolts for the rear strut top. I'd start with this rear panel here, and then the panel closest to the trunk release, as they conceal some clips for these side panels behind them. All of these panels are just held in with little plastic push clips. They can break pretty easily, so it's not a bad idea to have a few handy for when you reassemble this, and no specialty tools are required. I have the best luck with a really small flathead screwdriver. Lastly, there's this little protective plate that protects the fuel filler neck, so you just got to remove that with a couple 10mm bolts. Now that you have access to them, there are two 14mm nuts on the top of each strut. Quick note here, I would definitely have a variety of different sockets and ratchet sizes, and if you have one, a ratcheting wrench for these really tight little areas that these nuts are in. And then we actually had to use a little bit of a breaker bar to get the rear one off. They're just unnecessarily tight. And then there's one additional bolt on the bottom side that is actually a 12mm. So don't forget about that before you try to remove the strut. And on the bottom, there's just one more 17mm bolt holding the strut onto the knuckle. Another recommendation, remove the rear sway bar end link at least. You need a 15mm wrench and a 5mm hex bit to do this. I actually ended up fully removing the rear sway, even from the body mounts as well, just to get the access I needed to fully remove the rear strut. To get the strut off of the little post it's on, just used a pry bar and a hammer. And then this is really where the car being jacked up high in the air is a huge help. I saw some videos where people were struggling to get it out from under the car, and there is definitely a pro to jacking it up a little bit higher. Now for the sketchy part of the video, this is us using the spring compressors. We actually got a really good system in place here. Jeff would help me put the spring compressors on the spring equally on either side, and then when I actually started compressing it, I held it and pointed it out into the street in case anything did happen. But yeah, they were actually very easy to use. You just have to take your time, be careful, and then don't have it pointed at anything. And then after we fully disassembled it, this is when we discovered my front struts were totally blown.
Okay. So the struts are a little bit blown.
They're supposed to. So with that setback, we decided to just finish disassembling the struts and then calling it a night. The rears, for some reason, took a lot less compression than the fronts to get the strut disassembled. And I believe it is a 17mm bolt in the factory, but the conies that I had were a 19. And then, yeah, you can see they came apart super easy. And this is where another setback comes into play. It is a week after I started this job, exactly, more than a week. It's 8 days. And the whole reason is my man Lou gave me some OE style struts, which I needed because I found out that my conies were shot. So, and fun fact, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this because hopefully you at home are not dealing with these same issues, but the Coney yellows have a larger rear shaft in the strut. Jeff is nodding behind the screen. And because of that, this is the cap designed to clip into your little bump stop and kind of be the beginning of the stack that is your strut mount. And it's supposed to stop right there. So I had to end up going to a local pick and pull, and I found an RX-8 that thankfully still had its rear struts. They were a pain to get out, but RX-8s actually share the same parts there. So I was able to grab those, and fun fact, Mazda wanted $100 for these 2 parts for each side. So 4 parts in total, they wanted $100. I spent 7 at the pick and pull. So pretty happy with that. Can finally, once it all is assembled, it looks like this guy right here. And then this slides on, and this is how it should look. After overcoming that hiccup, the job went very smoothly. Reassembling the struts with lowering springs is super easy because you don't typically have to compress them. They are low enough to where you can just push down a little bit and you're able to get the top nut back on. Just make sure you get your stack in the correct order as far as bump stop and your mounts. I'll see if I can include a diagram in the description. The rears are the exact same deal as the fronts. They just look a little funnier because they have a much different design for the strut top. But yeah, this is all extremely straightforward. You just got to make sure that you have everything in the right order. I did end up buying some new strut mounts because I did need them for the same issue that I ran into with the bump stop caps. And this is not a bad part to replace. The RX-8 I pulled the little metal bits from was not in great shape, so I didn't want to take those. Now reinstalling in the front, super easy. Same thing, just make sure you're being mindful of your front fender. You don't want to scratch that up, getting it back in. And then the great camera work we did here to get this back in. You just want to make sure that, of course, you are being mindful of your brake lines as well, and your ABS line. You don't want to be pulling on those too much. And then it's just the opposite of disassembly. Get your upper control arm bolts back in, the bottom strut bolt back in, and then of course the 3 up top. And here too, it's a very good idea to jack up the car so you can get your upper control arm bolts tightened under load. From what I understand, it's a really good idea to have these done at ride height. I did get an alignment shortly after the video was done being filmed, but doing this just makes it to where your bushings don't have too much stress on them. And then also, of course, make sure you reattach your front sway bar. Exact same process, 5mm hex bit and a 14mm wrench up front. In the rear, we'll just say there's a lot of finagling going on. It was really tricky to get it back into place, but I was determined to do so without removing anything. And after Jeff pushing down a bunch on the rear suspension, kind of working around the control arms and the axle, we were able to get it into place and then slide the little bottom mount back on the little post there. Highly recommend using a hammer and a piece of wood to get it back into place. That's what we had the best luck with when we were actually remounting it. And that's pretty much it. After you get this guy in, and then you get the 12mm bolt in the bottom and the 14mm nuts on top, you're good. I highly recommend going around each corner and making sure that all of your bolts are snug, but that's pretty much it. The job is done. The Miata is on the ground. It is lower. The stupid wheel gap is gone. I am extremely content with the ride height, the way the car looks. I have done a shakedown drive and I'm really happy with how it drives, but I'll take you for a spin here in just a second to give you my thoughts. But to finish talking about the actual install itself, it should not take you more than like 3 to 5 hours. The reason why it took me over a week is because I ran into some weird stuff with the aftermarket struts that were installed previously. So if you are not dealing with that, which I explained throughout the video exactly the issues I had, I really think most people can knock this out, like I said, in a couple hours. I'd say as far as like complexity and difficulty, you're probably somewhere between a 5 and a 6. Really not too difficult. There's a couple specialty tools involved to throw these springs on, but I think the average DIYer would have no issues with it if they have kind of a standard set of tools and maybe an extra set of hands to help them out. Yeah, so that's kind of my thoughts with the job itself. I'm glad I like the ride height because I can't change it because they were lowering springs. So Just so you know, I will be doing a full comparison of lowering springs versus coilovers with my brother's car or another local friend's car. So you can expect to have a more in-depth conversation as to the pros and cons of each setup. And that will cover a lot more of like an in-depth driving experience. So let's take you for a spin. I'll give you kind of my initial thoughts. And then after I've lived with the car for a little bit, I will do that comparison video for you. So for those of you that are curious about which setup makes more sense for you, I hope to have that video out in the next couple of months. First impressions, or I should say like second impressions, because I went for a initial shakedown drive yesterday to make sure everything was working as I hoped it would. No weird creaks, rattles, noises, and it passed that test. So I am gonna give you my initial thoughts, but quick disclaimer, I highly recommend getting an alignment done anytime you do any type of ride height adjustment. Main reason being, from what I understand, the bushings that are in your control arms have a specific range of motion that they're designed to operate in, and whenever you adjust your ride height, you're kind of adjusting that range of motion. So if you don't get an alignment, you're going to be wearing your bushings a lot faster than you need to be, which will just make obviously more work for yourself, because you'll have to replace control arm bushings, and that's not a fun job. So I'm going to do a very short, quick initial first drive just to give you my thoughts, and then like I said earlier, I'll be doing a whole comparison on lowering springs versus coilovers in the future. So yeah, first impressions. This actually rides better than it did before, and I don't know if that's a lowering spring thing. It's more likely a I have struts that now work thing, which is really nice. It's very nice that I have struts that actually work as intended. I did not realize that my conies were totally blown. The car was crashy, but I just kind of thought like, oh, it kind of feels like Jordan's car, which the last time I drove it was on full stiff on his Meister R's. So probably not the best benchmark to compare my car's ride to. So yeah, I really enjoy the ride quality. It is improved compared to what it was before, and along with a better ride quality, I can just tell the car is lower. It feels more planted. There's less roll. Yeah, it's just very much improved all the way around. I'm really pleased with how the car drives. It'll be even better after I get it properly aligned, but first impressions, extremely pleased. The suspension can make such a difference when you're an enthusiast who enjoys like carving canyons, enjoys steering feel. It's incredible the difference a good suspension can make. So definitely recommend doing this upgrade if you are wanting to do things a little bit more cheaply and you don't really care about any ride quality adjustment. So yeah, those are my 2 cents. I will have more thoughts as I live with this, but this is the second day I have driven the car, so I don't have a crazy amount of time spent with it. But after I get some spirited drives and some road trips in, I would love to report back to you guys on how the car feels. I realized I never really did a proper outro while I was driving, so here you go. Here's your outro. Just to tease what's coming, there is a mod on the car right now that wasn't there before. I went ahead and did that in tandem to my lowering spring install because it took forever. But if you want to see that video and lots of other videos, definitely consider subscribing. That way you won't miss them. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Leave a comment down below. We try to engage with as many as we can, whether or not you want more suspension stuff, what you've done to your NC as far as suspension and how you've liked it. We love our comments to be kind of a cool place for NC owners to go to see what others have done and kind of deepen the Miata community, if that's the right word for that. So yeah, subscribe, like, comment, all the things. We have t-shirts if you want to support us in that way. That's it. Oh, I put 12 on there.
Okay.
Woo! Uno Moss.
Oh, goodness gracious. You're strong, man.
That'd be the, oh. I'll cut that out.